When Ray Farido surrendered to federal authorities 2 weeks ago, his name was not a household word in Cleveland. But the suspected hired murderer of Danny Greene has many associates here. He also has links to out-of-towners with important Cleveland connections. One of Farido's local friends is 36-year-old Butchie Cisternino. Cisternino is a convicted burglar and hijacker, and also a reputed hitman. He was allegedly tied to the old Collinwood Gang, an organized crime burglary ring that traveled around the country. Police sources say another longtime associate of Farido is Ron Carabia of Youngstown. Carabia is often called Ronnie the Crab. A recent newspaper report described him as the new head of organized crime in Youngstown. Both of these Cleveland area associates of Farido are reputed to have strong ties to James Licavoli, also known as Jack White. Licavoli is often described as Cleveland's current underworld boss, with ties to organized crime in Detroit and on the West Coast. Licavoli is alleged to be the leader of the racket's faction opposed to the late John Nardi and the late Danny Greene. Not only was Farido known to travel from his hometown of Erie to Cleveland and Youngstown, but he also made trips to the West Coast. He has been observed by police sources in both Los Angeles and San Francisco. One of Farido's associates in San Francisco is alleged to be Frank Vallata. Vallata is originally from Cleveland. He is reputed to be the bodyguard and right-hand man of alleged organized crime enforcer James Fratianno. Fratianno is known in San Francisco as the Weasel. He also grew up in Cleveland and has ties to at least one close associate of Cleveland boss Licavoli. Fratianno was seen in Cleveland before the murder of John Nardi. Sources close to the late Danny Greene say Fratianno was also here prior to Greene's death. Before his murder, Greene was concerned about the movements of both Fratianno of San Francisco and Licavoli of Cleveland, as well as their close associates. Federal and local authorities are now investigating the possibility of a relationship between these men and Danny Greene's alleged paid killer. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News. Ray Farido was brought directly to the federal courthouse by U.S. Marshals. When he saw our camera, he tried to hide his face, but was unsuccessful. Afterwards, Farido's fingerprints and mugshots were taken at the marshal's office. He was given lunch and placed in a holding cell until later in the afternoon. Then Farido was called before a federal grand jury to testify about his alleged role in the murder of Danny Greene. Farido stayed in the grand jury room only a few minutes. One of his lawyers waiting outside was Elmer Giuliani, brother-in-law of Joe Gallo. Gallo was once tried for attempting to bomb Greene in 1975. Another interesting witness today was Frank Imbrasia. Imbrasia was a partner in the Buckeye Cigarette Service, a vending company, with former Cleveland Underworld boss John Scalish. When asked why the grand jury wanted to question him about the Greene bombing murder, Imbrasia replied, "I don't know. I guess it's just because I'm friendly with people." The federal grand jury will meet again soon to hear evidence in the Danny Greene murder case. Action 3 News has learned that some big names in Cleveland's underworld may testify then or at another grand jury session coming up. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News, at the federal courthouse. James Licavoli, the reputed head of Cleveland's major underworld family, covered his face with his hands after his arrest. He was led from his Murray Hill home by local police and federal agents. The arrest occurred just after dawn, while the rest of Cleveland was fighting snow and rush hour traffic. Licavoli, also known as Jack White, is alleged to have hired killers to bomb gangsters John Nardi and Danny Greene. Licavoli was reportedly fighting for control of millions of dollars in racket activities. He allegedly started planning the murders in the summer of '76. According to an FBI affidavit, the bombings were set up by alleged organized crime enforcer James the Weasel Fratianno. Fratianno is originally from Cleveland but now lives in San Francisco. He was arrested this morning in California. Also, according to the affidavit, alleged hitman Ray Farido was contacted by Fratianno. At a meeting in September of '76, Farido received the contract for the hit on Nardi and Greene. In return, Licavoli allegedly told Farido, "You'll have all the money you need for a lifetime." In May 1977, John Nardi was murdered, but not by Farido. It seems others had allegedly been given contracts to kill Nardi and Greene too. A Licavoli associate allegedly explained that whoever got to the victims first would receive the money. Farido began stalking Danny Greene, the remaining contract victim, this past summer. Greene's phone was tapped in order to track his movements better. The tapes were allegedly provided to Farido by Angelo Big Angie Leonardo. Leonardo is married to a sister of the late Cleveland Underworld boss John Scalish. He was arrested today. Also arrested today was the man who allegedly actually tapped Greene's phone. He is Tommy Sanito, an alleged loan shark. It was through Sanito's alleged tap of Greene's phone that the would-be killers learned of the victim's dental appointment on October the 6th. It was immediately after this appointment that Greene was bombed. The day before Greene was murdered, Farido allegedly met with this man, Butchie Cisternino. Cisternino allegedly supplied the dynamite, switches, and other electronic equipment used in the Greene killing. He was allegedly the second man in the getaway car used after the bombing. He was also arrested today by federal authorities. Another key man in the alleged plot to kill Nardi and Greene was Ronnie Crab Carabia. Carabia is reportedly the new king of organized crime in Youngstown. He was arrested this morning in Miami. As one Justice Department official said, these arrests should have a significant impact on organized crime here, but it could not have been done without tremendous cooperation between investigating agencies. Another government attorney called the probe leading to today's arrests one hell of an investigation. It's a prime example of what local and federal law enforcement authorities can do when they decide to work together. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News, at the Federal Building. James Licavoli and two others allegedly involved in the murder conspiracy were arraigned at the Justice Center. For Licavoli, it was the first time he had worn prison garb in 40 years. To spectators in the courtroom, Cleveland's Underworld boss appeared upset. Said one observer, he just sat there steaming, glaring at everybody. Judge Leo Spelliscy ordered all three held without bond. Alleged syndicate enforcer James the Weasel Fratianno is still in federal custody in San Francisco. At last report, he was being interviewed by the FBI. Cuyahoga County prosecutors want him sent to Cleveland as soon as possible so he can be arraigned on state murder charges. Youngstown organized crime boss Ronnie Crab Carabia is being held in Miami. He was arrested there yesterday. At a hearing this morning, Carabia testified about his real estate holdings before a magistrate set bond on federal racketeering charges. He will also return to Cleveland to be arraigned for the Nardi Greene murders. Meanwhile, at the prosecutor's office, lawyers are already planning for the trial. It may not take place until March, but it might be one of the biggest cases ever.
This could well be. It's been a tremendous cooperative effort. Federal, state, local authorities zeroed in on organized crime, on the family in Cleveland, as it's called, and could well be one of the biggest trials in Ohio's history, maybe the biggest. At least going back to the late 20s when the Purple Gang was busted in Toledo.
When John Nardi was killed by a remote control bomb last May, many thought arrests would never be made. The same feeling was also expressed about the Danny Greene murder. Now, not only have many top organized crime figures been charged, but more arrests and indictments are possible. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News. At the federal courthouse, the grand jury heard several witnesses in its investigation of the Nardi Greene murders. First was a salesman from Dealer's Outlet. The remote control bomb that killed Danny Greene was planted in a car purchased here. The salesman was not expected to know who bought the car, but he might have provided some worthwhile leads. Then there were several witnesses from Greene's apartment building. It was here that Greene's phone was allegedly tapped, so his enemies could track his movements. Federal investigators want to know more about that tap. They want to know where it was set up and how. Even though authorities believe they have arrested the men who conspired to kill Greene, there are still many gaps in the chain of evidence. These grand jury witnesses could help to fill those gaps, thus making a better case against those arrested last week. But investigators still don't know who pressed the bomb button that killed John Nardi. They are hoping that their probe of the higher-ups who ordered his murder will lead them to the trigger man. The grand jury will hear more evidence in the Danny Greene-John Nardi bombing cases this week, and Action 3 News has learned that one witness may be the closest friend and confidant of Cleveland Underworld boss James Licavoli. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News, at the federal courthouse. James the Weasel Fratianno arrived at Hopkins Airport under tight security. Surrounded by U.S. Marshals, he exited the plane by a service entrance. He was then escorted to waiting cars parked on the ramp. The extra precautions were taken because federal authorities believe there is a contract on Fratianno's life. Apparently someone is afraid that the alleged mob enforcer may talk about the Nardi Greene murders or about other underworld hits. Fratianno traveled to Cleveland under an assumed name. The marshals guarding him were sworn to secrecy about plans for the trip. He was taken immediately to the federal courthouse and then to the Cuyahoga County Jail. Fratianno was born in Cleveland 63 years ago. It was here he earned his nickname, the Weasel. He moved to San Francisco in 1946. He has been convicted of extortion, but he is most famous as the alleged executioner and enforcer for the Mafia on the West Coast. One of Fratianno's closest California associates is this man, Mike Rizzatella. Rizzatella is allegedly the number 1 or number 2 man in the Los Angeles mob. He traveled to Cleveland with Fratianno just before John Nardi's murder and made a second trip just before Danny Greene's murder. A close Cleveland friend of Fratianno is Archie Andriano. Here, Andriano is on the right, Fratianno is on the left. This is a surveillance picture obtained by Action 3 News. It was taken by the FBI in Palm Springs a year ago May. Andriano met Fratianno at the Cleveland airport last August when he allegedly came here to discuss the Greene murder with hitman Ray Farido and Underworld boss James Licavoli. Here is another surveillance photograph obtained by Action 3 News. Again, the picture was taken at Palm Springs. On the left is Andriano. On the right is Fratianno. In the middle is the late Anthony Tony the Dope Del Santer, head of organized crime in Youngstown. Fratianno allegedly introduced hitman Ray Farido to Del Santer, who was allegedly acting for Underworld boss James Licavoli. Fratianno will be arraigned on state murder charges later this week. If he is convicted, local police and federal agents will consider it a major victory in their fight against organized crime. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News, at the Justice Center. All of the grand jury witnesses today are alleged to be friends or close associates of this man, Cleveland Underworld boss James Licavoli, also known as Jack White. They were Paul Ciricillo, also known as Paul Lish, Joe Spaganlo, also known as Joe Spags, Tony Hughes, and Tony Liberatore. Our Action 3 News artists tried to sketch these men before they entered the grand jury room, but they were so afraid of having their pictures on television, they ran. They ran to the courthouse men's room. They hid there until the grand jury called them. Since our artist was a woman, they knew that was one place we couldn't follow them. But we did film them later with our camera. This is Paul Ciricillo. He lives with Underworld boss Licavoli on Murray Hill. Federal investigators believe he may know something about the Nardi Greene murder plans. Then there was Joe Spaganlo, also known as Joe Spags. Spags is one of the best-known bookmakers in town. He allegedly used to make book out of the car dealership where the Greene bomb car was purchased. Another Nardi Greene grand jury witness was Tony Hughes. Hughes is a friend of Licavoli and a business partner of Teamster leader Jackie Presser. Authorities wanted to ask him about the apartment where hitman Ray Farido stayed prior to the Greene murder. And finally, there was labor leader Tony Liberatore. Liberatore is another close friend of Licavoli. He was appointed to Cleveland's Regional Sewer District Board by Mayor Perk. He is best known for his conviction in the murder of 2 policemen. More witnesses will testify before the Nardi Greene grand jury tomorrow. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News. The first witness was longtime Danny Greene associate Brian O'Donnell. O'Donnell has an interest in the Islander Bar in Middleburg Heights. He was allegedly involved in various business deals with Greene and John Nardi, as well as with underworld figures in New York. Another Greene associate who testified was Jim Coppola. Coppola was allegedly questioned about the cars Greene and his friends were driving the week of the murder. He was accompanied to his grand jury appearance by Greene's former right-hand man, Keith Ritzen. Then the girlfriend of the late Hank Boom Boom Greco was called to testify. Greco was a reputed bomber who was close to both Nardi and Greene. He was found murdered in Summit County the week after Nardi was killed. And finally, there was Charles Spider Grisham. Grisham is from Warren, Ohio. He is allegedly an associate of Youngstown organized crime boss Ronnie Crab Carabia. Carabia was arrested last week in the Nardi Greene murder case. Many of the witnesses subpoenaed to testify today apparently could not be found, but we've been told that the Nardi Greene grand jury will continue its sessions until all witnesses are heard. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News, at the federal courthouse. When organized crime boss James Licavoli was arrested, his underworld empire was thrown into chaos. So now the question is, who's minding the store while Licavoli is in jail? Can he direct his underworld operation from a cell, as did New York's Vito Genovese? Law enforcement authorities tell us some of the racket's money is being collected for Licavoli. They say he is trying to maintain control, but it is difficult from behind bars. The money that will trickle in will come from gambling, loan sharking, vending, labor racketeering, and protection. As for who's collecting the cash, it's anybody's guess. Police say one possibility is Frank Imbrassia. Imbrassia is a partner in Buckeye Cigarette Service run by late Underworld boss John Scalish. Today we asked Imbrassia if he might be keeping tabs on Licavoli's money, but he replied, "I don't know anything about it." Authorities say a second possibility is Milt Rockman, another partner in Buckeye Cigarette Service. We tried to reach Rockman there, but we were told, "He won't call you back, he doesn't want to be bothered." Federal sources allege a third man who might be holding Underworld purse strings is Tony Liberatore. But when we asked Liberatore about it, he said, "I have no response. I mind my own business." Liberatore is a labor leader and member of the District Sewer Board. Then there's Peter Milano, nephew of former Cleveland Syndicate head Frank Milano. Milano is in a California prison now, but he is due to get out in 9 weeks. Police say they hear that Peter Milano will eventually return to Cleveland to take over Licavoli's empire and the millions that go with it. In the meantime, a lot of Licavoli's associates are apparently following advice contained in this book of quotations, written by old man Tony Milano, Peter's father. Milano wrote, "If you want to live in peace, look, listen, and be quiet." That's what Underworld members who are not in jail are doing, laying low, trying to stay alive, waiting to see what happens next. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News. Keith Ritzen, the man on the right, arrived for his sentencing 45 minutes late. He was accompanied by Kevin McTaggart, the redhead who often claimed he was Danny Greene's nephew. Ritzen's charge of carrying a concealed weapon dates back to August 76. When police stopped him, he also had a map in his car. That map had X's apparently marking the homes of Ritzen's enemies. 2 of those locations have been bombed, but though Ritzen was a suspect, he was never arrested. Ritzen was described by prosecutors today as Danny Greene's enforcer. The government said Ritzen should receive a jail sentence because he is a menace to public safety. Despite this, Judge Sam Singali gave Ritzen 2 years probation and a $250 fine.
I have no comment on the judge's decision. Whatever he decided was fair one way or the other.
But you're obviously pleased.
I'm pleased with probation.
Underworld sources told Action 3 News long ago that Judge Singali would give Ritzen probation instead of a jail sentence. But today the judge denied any favoritism, although he did say he once knew Danny Greene, Ritzen's former employer, well enough to say hello.
I have seen Mr. Greene before. The incident they're probably referring to is one in which I was having dinner with some people in a restaurant one night, and Mr. Greene came in and he passed the table and he nodded to me and I nodded to him, and that's the association I had with Mr. Greene.
Today's sentence of probation for Keith Ritzen isn't likely to make local law enforcement officials any less determined to put him behind bars. A federal grand jury is still hearing evidence relating to Ritzen, and Action 3 News has learned that grand jury may take some action soon. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News. Danny Greene was blown apart last October by a remote-control bomb. The explosion rocked the Lyndhurst lot where Greene's car was parked. It was only through luck that passers-by were not injured or killed. Then came the long, meticulous investigation to find who murdered Greene. Many thought police and federal agents would never arrest the hitman, much less the organized crime bosses who hired him. But then on November 11th, Ray Farido was arrested in Pittsburgh. Farido is a longtime associate of Greene's underworld enemies. Authorities said Farido was hired to kill Greene because he had experience with remote-control explosives. In Farido's hometown of Erie, Pennsylvania, police confiscated the suspected getaway car used in the Greene murder. At Farido's home, they found an old issue of Cleveland magazine, opened to victim Greene's picture. But when Farido was brought to Cleveland by U.S. Marshals 1 month ago, The men who allegedly hired him still had not been arrested. People said Farido was a stand-up guy, that he would never talk, that he would observe the Mafia code of silence. But the next day, Farido was taken before a federal grand jury. There, Justice Department lawyers advised him there was no way out. The case against him was massive. On Wednesday, the following morning, Farido asked to see the 2 Pittsburgh FBI agents who had arrested him. On Thursday, December 1st, Farido was arraigned for Greene's murder, but he had already started his confession to the FBI. Friday morning, federal and local prosecutors agreed to give Farido a deal in exchange for his testimony against Mafia higher-ups. After it was agreed that charges against him would be reduced, Farido was secretly smuggled out of Cleveland by U.S. Marshals. Just after dawn, 2 days later, came the big arrests. James Licavoli, also known as Jack White, was accused of ordering the murder of Danny Greene, as well as the bombing murder of Teamster leader rackets figure John Nardi. According to an FBI affidavit, Licavoli is the head of Cleveland's La Cosa Nostra family. With Licavoli was arrested his alleged lieutenant, John Calandra. It was Calandra who allegedly acted as a go-between while arrangements were being made for the Nardi Greene killings. Also arrested as part of the alleged murder conspiracy was Angelo Big Angie Leonardo. Leonardo was married to the sister of Cleveland's late Underworld boss, John Scalish. Another man arrested for allegedly plotting to murder Nardi and Greene was Butchie Cisternino. Cisternino is a reputed hitman and also a convicted burglar and hijacker. One of the best-known organized crime figures arrested for the Nardi Greene bombings was James the Weasel Fratianno. Fratianno lives in San Francisco, but is originally from Cleveland. He is allegedly the Mafia's West Coast enforcer. Authorities have linked him to at least 16 gangland hits. Another prominent underworld figure arrested was Ronnie Crab Carabia. Carabia is reportedly the head of organized crime in Youngstown. He allegedly also has ties to some well-known businessmen in the area. So what remains of gangster Danny Greene's crowd today? Authorities allege these are the major people still left: Brian O'Donnell, Keith Ritzen, Kevin McTaggart, and Danny Greene Jr. O'Donnell is allegedly more important than the rest of the Greene associates because of his allegedly important financial ties to underworld figures in other cities. Federal authorities say O'Donnell and other members of the Greene faction are now allegedly trying to infiltrate or acquire legitimate businesses in California, Texas, and Florida. O'Donnell, Ritzen, and others are allegedly using organized crime connections in New York and Chicago for at least some of these business deals. These are contacts made by Danny Greene before he was murdered. So now the bombing murder last May of John Nardi and the killing of Danny Greene have been partially solved. Police believe they have caught some of the murderers, but others may yet be arrested. And authorities also predict that 1978 may be a very interesting year for Greene's surviving associates. Martha Bateman, Action 3 News.